pleased to introduce Heather Higgins, the CEO of Independent Women's Voice. She is well known nationally and notably helped the Trump team develop their messaging on the abortion debate for their 2024 campaign. Her LLC, Suasion Insights, targets swing voters, particularly women, independents, and millennials, and she continues to work with the Trump administration on abortion messaging and how to position it so it appeals to the growing voter bloc of independents and moderates. We must win the midterms. Please welcome Heather Higgins.
Thank you, Beth. I think I've got me on lavalier.
Let me turn that on. You got the lavalier, all right. You see the button? Let's see here. There we go. Whoops, I'm looking at it backwards. There we go. We should be good.
Thanks. Thank you all. Independent women. Is there echo? No, I think. Independent women. Is that echoing? Still echoing. Well. Thank you. See if that solves the problem. Independent Women is known for a lot of different issues. If anyone in the Q&A wants to ask me about, for example, men and women's sports, which we led the charge on starting in 2018, seeing if we could turn that issue around, or sex definitions. So we tried very hard to get President Trump to say there are only two sexes. But between us, I think between his age and background, disposition, the word sex is always a verb. So you'll hear him say there are only two genders. But that and various other issues. But I thought what would be interesting to you, I think particularly because we've got midterms coming up. And from the data that I've seen for all the turnout efforts, what really mattered in the last election was that it was Trump who was running, not the recruitment of low propensity voters and the turnout efforts. It was Trump. And Trump gave people a reason to vote for him. And we had been very concerned going into the election that abortion would be a killer issue based on what had happened since Dobbs. So let me just start by asking you all some questions to get a sense of the room. I'm just curious, for how many of you is abortion like a top 3 issue? So, all right, some. And for any of you, is it the top single issue? Okay. So, are you only in politics for the GOP because of the abortion issue? That is, if the GOP weren't where it is on abortion, would you no longer vote GOP? Or do you care about other GOP issues? Okay. I'm curious for the room, how many of you were happy about the Dobbs decision, ending Roe versus Wade? Yeah, generally conservatives were thrilled. After Dobbs, how many of you were surprised at the election results that we were getting in the different ballot initiatives and so forth? That we were losing, all right. So just so you know, I'm just curious if you have guesses on what the win-loss rate was through the spring of 2024. There had been, between ballot initiatives and special elections, there were 12 of them. How many of those did the pro-life side win? Any guesses? The answer is 0, right? So we knew that the messaging game was a far bigger challenge. The left was trotting out the abortion issue at every opportunity to talk about this issue. And so we were retained at Suasion Insights to look at this issue and see if there was some way to neutralize it so that Republicans could have a chance to win and pull over these essential voters to getting the majority that they needed. The maybe best way to think about this is to tell a story, and I need to premise this by saying, because it's a blonde joke, that my mother and grandmother were both blonde and brilliant. And 2 of my 3 children are blonde and brilliant. So this is not meant as an aspersion on blondes, but there was a blonde, and she said, "Dear God, I have just lost my job, and I have children to feed, I have a mortgage to pay, I've got car payments to make. Please help me win the lottery." And the lottery comes, and the lottery goes, and she doesn't win. And the next week, she prays even more fervently, and she said, "Dear God, I lost my job, and I couldn't make the car payment, and they've taken away my car, and I'm going to lose my home, and I've got my kids to feed. Please help me win the lottery." And the lottery comes, and the lottery goes, and she doesn't win. And the 3rd week, she is totally desperate. And she's saying, "Dear God, I have lost my car, lost my job, I'm losing my apartment, please help me win the lottery." And the clouds rumble, and a voice comes down, and he says, "Sweetheart, help me out, buy a ticket." So the Republicans are a lot like the blonde in this story. They want deliverance, but they won't do the basic things they need to do to get themselves to a position to achieve the ends that we hope the Lord wants us to achieve. So that 0 to 12 loss record is what encouraged people to come to me, because I'm known for outside-the-box messaging. So, for example, if you heard Susan Collins give her speech on the Senate floor as the final determining vote about whether Kavanaugh would get his nomination or not, and she threaded Me Too but ended up supporting Kavanaugh. That was our messaging guidance on how to talk about that issue so that we could get Kavanaugh into that seat. So looking at that 0 to 12 record, I think it was clear to many of us that we needed to change what we were doing, because obviously what we were doing wasn't working, and it was hurting the GOP, and it was hurting the pro-life cause. But it was interesting, if you talk to the people who'd run those campaigns and been involved, their only explanation was that it wasn't their messaging, it was just that they hadn't had enough money. I don't think that that is correct. Even before I did the research, I didn't think that that was correct, because if you looked at private polling, for example, you remember there was that Ohio ballot initiative. It actually came in 2 different pieces. This is the data from Ohio, done by a very reputable firm privately, but they shared it with me. They lost overall 57 to 41. They lost 48% of Christians, 45% of evangelicals, 52% of Catholics, 61% of mainline Protestants, and 72% of everybody else. They lost 38% of those who go to church at least one time a week, and 31% of those who go more than one time a week. They lost 27% of the GOP and 63% of ticket splitters, and they lost 65% of those 18 to 44. Is that surprising? I would argue it's not. I think the people who wanted Roe to end were not thinking about how hard. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have wanted Roe to end, but I did not see the work on the ground that recognized that the world was different than it was 50 years ago. And if you think about it, we live in a world, if you think about the changes that have happened, we have 72% of Americans now saying that abortion should be legal. And that includes 53% of voters who consider themselves pro-life, and 62% of Republicans, and 80% of the swing vote. Why? Well, we now have a society where extramarital sex is normal. Abortion has been a perceived right for 50 years. That's so that for at least some of the people in the room, that's their entire lifetimes. This has been a right, or perceived as a right. Abortion is no longer shocking and rare. Women have had it themselves, or they know somebody who's had it, and they're very often empathetic to those women. And for a lot of parents and grandparents, it's now seen as an insurance policy against things like date rape, when their kids go to college or something else happens, and they don't want their daughters coming home pregnant from some random one night, whatever. So this all played in, and I want you to remember the early leak of the Dobbs decision. You remember how Alito's first draft was made public about 3 months before the decision actually came out? Somebody was very smart if they planned that, or else they were very smart to take advantage of it, because that gave them nearly 3 months to reframe the argument. And the way they reframed it, if you looked at what the Democrats were doing, it was no longer about what any decision would be. They could have left it at 15 weeks and states get to decide. The reframed argument was what Republicans would do if they ever got the votes, if they ever got the chance. So it no longer mattered if a Republican said his position, as Youngkin was 15 weeks. It was what they would do. Nikki Haley said that she wouldn't be doing anything with abortion because she didn't have the votes. That's a very bad argument. I'll tell you why later, but all of that didn't work. After what they had, the messaging campaign that the Democrats had shifted to. Hold on a minute. Lavalier came off. So we were retained. We did this work. It was important to the Trump campaign. They used a lot of it, and I think the single best example of their use of it, not only in some of their decisions, like changing the platform, and which I can walk you all through why they did that, and not going with a federal bill, but saying it was a states' rights issue, saying that they would not ban it. But if you look at the handouts when you go home, not now, that are on your table, that is a very tight distillation of a lot of what we found. And the very last of the 4 sections of it is J.D. Vance's debate with Waltz. How many of you remember that debate? Okay. Everything he said in there was taken from our memo on how to talk about the issue. And it was effective because if you were watching, not Fox, but CNN or other stations who were interviewing female independent swing voters as they had been watching the debate, they uniformly were saying things like, I never thought I'd hear a Republican talk like that. I have to reconsider. And you really knew it was effective because within a week of that debate, Kamala stopped talking about abortion, and she started talking about her new proposed home assistance entitlement. Because they knew that with what JD had done, their attacks no longer worked. So I'm going to walk you through some of our findings and some of our solutions. You'll find a lot more in the book. If you've got a husband who's running for Senate and wants guidance, I can go a lot deeper than what's in the book, but it'll give you a sense of it. So the first finding was that, Republicans and everybody does all these polls and say, please rank the issues. And abortion is almost always 4 or 5%, maybe 6%. In Wisconsin recently, though, in the judicial election, it was at 12%, which is way outside of norm. But those issue lists are misleading. Why? Because 48% of voters, 52% among women, will not vote for a politician who they think is fundamentally opposite to their views on abortion. It's a prerequisite, it's a litmus test. It doesn't matter how good the rest of your issues are. If they're worried about you on what you will do on abortion, on either side of the aisle, either side of the debate, those voters will not vote for you. That's the first thing to keep in mind. The second thing is the words pro-life and pro-choice have wildly different meanings. You will find that in the research we did, we deliberately avoided those words because the definitions are so broad. There are a lot of people who will self-describe as pro-choice who believe in a 6-week heartbeat bill. And they think that that's a pro-choice position to have a 6-week bill. An even greater number who will describe themselves as pro-choice because they believe in exemptions, even if they're not for 6 weeks. And you have, on the pro-life side, a lot of people who think that going up to like viability, just short of viability, is a pro-life position because those have been offered as pro-life policies. So the terms are very confusing, and what you think you're saying and meaning can be wildly different from what other people are hearing. Beyond that, you should understand that the term pro-choice right now means a centrist, reasonable abortion position. It does not mean the legal extreme that is the reality of Democrat laws and positions in their ballot initiatives. And part of the reason that that's the case, that it's become a catch-all and a centrist term, is that people do not believe that Democrats actually want abortions. In fact, if you look very hard, you will not find any language where any Democrat talks positively about abortion. So people believe that they don't want abortions. They're just empathetic to women. And the same people believe that there is no such thing as a late-term abortion. That if there is abortions that have to happen late in pregnancy, it's because they're medically necessary. That's not what the Guttmacher Institute shows. They show that almost all of those are financially driven. But that's not what the public believes. And even the term late-term abortion sounds politicized and manufactured to them because of their starting beliefs. What's much worse is the term pro-life. That could not have a more negative brand perception, and it could not be more different than what the pro-life community assumes the term means. For most Americans, if they hear pro-life, what they think that means is that whatever policy position you say you support right now, what you really would do is you would ban abortion as soon as you had a majority in the votes. And that that ban might not even include the life of the mother. What we found repeatedly was that there were large slugs of the American population who think that pro-life is even against the life of the mother, and they think that there are states where mothers can die. That is what led to a lot of the ads that you saw. And part of that is because if you look at medical terminology, if you're ending an ectopic pregnancy, that's described as a medical abortion, even though that's not how the pro-life community would describe it. One of the things that independent women did during the abortion that was very helpful to a lot of candidates was we created and we maintain a website called factsaboutabortionnow.com. And we did it because even on Fox, there would be these maps of the United States, and 2/3 of it would be colored in red with legends saying, banned. And their banned would be 15 weeks or less, or there's litigation going on. So Montana, that had a 5-month, legal for 5 months, law would be colored in red. So we created this map, and if you want to go on your computers when you're at home, factsaboutabortionnow.com. It starts with not only a map, which is graded shades of green into orange to red, but it shows much more granularly for each state what the laws actually are now. And the legend at the top is, abortion is legal in every state, always for at least the life of the mother, and with often exceptions or time thereafter. And so you can click on the state and see. But a lot of people didn't even know that the life of mother is something that the pro-life community supported. Secondly, and you and I can all argue these points, but I'm just telling you how somebody who is not a conservative looks at the term pro-life. The first word, the most frequent word, is hypocrite. They want the baby, they want other people to have babies that they won't pay for. They want you to have the baby, but they don't want to do the pay for the prenatal care. They don't want to help raise the child. And then there are other issues which seem inconsistent to them, even though we can explain them, but things like gun violence or death penalty. In their head, if you're pro-life, you should be for life and with them on all these issues, which to them means that, so again, it's another way that term is problematic before you even get started, as soon as that word comes out of your mouth. And the branding that we have is a problem because it drives away many people who agree with the that we have. If you just ask questions based on policy, there's a very large number of people who support making abortion illegal, except for very specific exceptions after viability. Actually, there's only 23% who think that you should have abortion at any time for any reason. The rest of the country is more conservative than that. But because of the terminology and the branding that we've got, that's become a problem. I'm sorry, type is smaller than my eyes are using. So in the back of your book, there's the J.D. Vance debate. One of the things that I bet none of you noticed, but that you will find when you go through it, is he never uses the word pro-life to describe himself or to describe his policy position. We instruct how to get around that by doing other things so that you are much more clear, because that clarity is really, really important and expected. Another finding we had, which is important when you're looking at your polling, is that what people say they are, even if you divide it by your actual position, not by just the label pro-life, pro-choice, or in between, but you give buckets that people could assign themselves to. What people want personally and what they think the law should be are two very different things. There is a huge switch, generally to being more liberal when it comes to the law, I think largely driven by empathy. So women particularly, however pro-life they are, personally will say, I can't stand in another person's shoes. I don't know what's going on in their life. I don't know all the circumstances. I don't feel like I should be dictating. I want to be empathetic and give them options. And one of the things that's really fascinating is the lower down the socioeconomic group you go, the far broader range of reasons for having an abortion become. Because there's all sorts of things that don't show up if you're talking to middle-income voters. But you go further down and suddenly there's drug addiction, a mother's a crackhead, there's discovering at the 8th month that the father is your brother and you never knew this. There's a wide range of issues that show up that don't show up with more affluent people. And you don't have to be very affluent to get out of those problem sets. In fact, if you try and look at where people actually are on the law, 70% are for having either some period of time, pre-viability, and or more exceptions than rape, incest, and life of the mother. Primarily significant health issues for the mother and the ability of the baby to survive. Those are very important to people. Serious genetic effects follows that as the third thing. Another thing that jumped out at us in the research is the extraordinary importance of exceptions. Republicans need to lead with, well, not lead with, but when they get to describing their position, they need to be very clear about the exceptions they support. In Georgia, you're fortunate. You've got it's a 6-week bill, but you've got a long list of the exceptions that people actually care about. So that's very important for Republicans to show that they are cognizant of those, and if they support them, say that they support those. It is 89% who want exceptions beyond rape, incest, and the life of the mother, which is the only things you hear at the presidential level. And 79% of those who, when initially put themselves in the bucket of saying they want the law to be no time, but they do want exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother, when you specifically ask them about these other exceptions, 79% of them also want those other exceptions that Republicans are bad at enumerating. Next big point that jumped out, hugely important. The GOP is not trusted on abortion. The DeSantis move to go to the 6-week bill on top of the 15-week that was already law was something that the left has really exploited. 50% of people say that if a GOP politician says that he's for like a 12-week bill, they can't trust him because there'll be so much pressure from the party to ban abortion that, particularly if he's identified as pro-life, then they can't trust him. So the party itself has an issue where voters are very, very suspicious about that. The other thing that comes across really grimly is how the GOP lacks empathy. 2/3 of voters say that the GOP lacks empathy. And a lot of that includes like 62% of Republicans. So that was part of why we said that the platform needed to change, to show that there was movement in the party and we were opening to Vance's empathetic messaging. And the final thing that I want to flag, there were more, but this is just, I'm not trying to belabor this over lunch, is people hate that abortion has become a politicized issue. Hate it. They want you to take the politics out of it and just do what is good for the woman. And part of that is because, and I'm sorry, I should have said this, mothers now, it's now about women's health care. Democrats have won that this is a woman's issue. Hugely, people think that the mother and the baby are equally important, or the mother is more important than the baby. And I think we're down to like 7% who are saying that the baby is more important than the mother throughout. Particularly in that first half of pregnancy. And a lot of people assume that it's because people don't understand that there's a baby in there. And we were just talking earlier, and I think a lot of people don't know the degree of development that is actually in there, but even with full consciousness of that, they still think it should be the woman's choice, and that they should not be advocating and telling her what to do. So with those things in mind, there's a lot of advice in there. The first and most important thing is that we need to start winning hearts and minds. After we did badly in the 23 midterms, Speaker Mike Johnson said to me, I really need your help because the only thing I've heard from the pro-life groups is that we need to go harder on this issue. And I'm like, I was a pro-life activist and doing legal cases on this for all my life, and the one thing I learned is if you don't win the hearts and minds of the jury, you're not going to win, and the same thing's true with legislation. Pushing for more extreme legislation does not work. We need another way for Republicans to talk. And that is true. In fact, even if you talk to the GOP, there is huge preference for programs that help women over stricter laws, like 72 to 16. And there's a real distaste for continuing to have stricter laws as opposed to a softer approach of education and care and assistance, et cetera. So starting with empathy, one of the things you all may remember when JD answered the debaters in the debate, the first question about abortion, he stopped it and was not about policy and he was not about politics. He told the story of a woman who was a friend of his whom he loved who'd had an abortion. It totally changed the conversation. Women suddenly felt, okay, he hears us, now I can listen to him. Starting with an empathetic story is incredibly, incredibly important. Another thing that Republicans need to remember, I was telling somebody this earlier, if you were to simplify the left-right divide over the last 50 years, it was as though the left acted as though there was no baby, but the right acted as though there was no woman. And even now when you've got groups talking about this, they only talk about women to the extent they are mothers. Well, a lot of women don't want to be mothers, or they're not ready to be mothers, or whatever the issue is, we need to talk about women overall. We need to remember that abortion and foster care are not seen as pro-women. They are seen as anti-abortion. But trying to make contraception more available and reframing this as abortion is a problem because of a larger problem of unwanted pregnancies. Well, maybe men and women ought to be more conscious about when they're choosing to make a life and what's involved in that. That's part of why it was so important for Trump to not be negative about IVF. A huge issue. But the public thinks, only 4 out of 10 thinks that the right favors contraception and IVF, which is not true. It's about 80% if you poll Republicans. But being pro-life needs to mean caring about the woman as much as you care about the baby. Third, candidates in their own states need to know what their own laws are. We've found that a lot of the time they don't really. And not only what the law is, but what the programs are and what all the different efforts are around abortion to help the women. Most people don't know about all the different efforts. You've got 2 at least represented in this room that are great, but there aren't enough of them and people don't know about them. So politicians talking about them and talking them up and how they need help and there should be more of them, that would be a good thing. Being specific and clear about exceptions, never say ban. Please never say ban. Glenn Youngkin, in part, did badly in Virginia relative to what he expected to do because he had what should have been a winning proposal at a 15-week abortion bill, but the way he described it was banned after. And as soon as you use the word banned, that's all people hear. It goes right back to their prejudices. The DCCC specifically said, even if somebody has a bill that bans abortion after 39 weeks, we're using that word ban, right? Their bill bans abortion. So, and you never get a chance to clarify and clean up the misperception, so do not use that word. The good news is, when you read that, I think that we can not only neutralize the attacks of the left, as Vance and Trump managed to do in 24, I believe there's a way to actually win the issue if you talk about that empathetic 70% and give them a name, and that's where you land. Republicans aren't there yet, but that is my hope. The grim thing, though, is as much as Trump and Vance succeeded in neutralizing the issue, and Kamala had to change her pitch, and we saw the results in the election, we are now, instead of being 0 for 12, we're at 3 for 21. The 3 ballot initiatives that the anti-abortion side won in 24 were not, they had one thing in common. None of them rolled back further or restricted further abortion laws. They merely reified what was there and kept it from getting more extreme. Important to keep that in mind. And we just had another loss in Wisconsin, the special election for the 3rd and important swing Supreme Court seat. That was a 10-point loss, and that election was entirely about abortion. And he went back to using the standard language that Republicans have used that can be demonized in a state that had an 1864 law looming as a risk of banning all abortions. And so, you know, particularly in your state and local elections, this is going to be very important. The left is going to try and make it an issue wherever they can because they know that Republicans are very bad at talking about this in Vance's compelling way. Ultimately, though, if you're on the outside and this is an issue for you, I would say that the anti-abortion community needs to decide on what their goal is. Is it to be having a legal solution where you try to pass the most restrictive law you can, even if you know, as in Arizona, that it's going to be undone and it's going to create a lot of collateral damage? Or do you go for the most conservative law that is feasible, given the present mindset of the people who are voting, work really hard on winning hearts and minds, and then saving the most lives that you can? And I think ultimately that is the decision that the movement has to wrestle with. And right now, a lot of it's in the first camp of the stricter laws. That said, I'm happy to take any questions, and I'm happy to talk about any other issue, from Qatari planes to men and women's sports or whatever it is. If I have knowledge and a view, I will be happy to share it with you.
Got a question over there.
Do you have an alternate word or saying for pro-life? So instead of using the word pro-life, what would you recommend saying instead?
Based on what we were able to see in the data, most people want some period of time, right? I would say the sweet spot right now is in that 14 to 16 week, which, by the way, it's better to use months than weeks. Weeks is left over from trying to roll back row. Months sounds a lot longer. Weeks sounds really short. Most people don't do math. So if you say 16 weeks, that sounds short, but if you say 4 months, they go, ooh, that's long, you know, into the second trimester. And most people want there to be exceptions. So the term that tested best was the life and choice position. We should reclaim the word choice because we're all about giving women choices, being more informed, teaching them about contraception, whether if you're Catholic, call it family planning, whatever that is. And in every other policy area that the Republicans have, they have far more choice. We're all about choice. This is the one issue where we've ceded ground and it's to our detriment. I think the other word that you could use, except that I worry that too many people don't know what it means, it's right up there with oligarchs, is empathizers. But if you just call them empathy voters, I think enough people know that. But life and choice, take back the word choice. You're for life and you're for choice. So.
Thank you. And I work with a medical pregnancy center, and our cards say, our sidewalk cards, we want to empower, we want to educate and equip women to make a life-affirming choice. Several things that are completely left out of the abortion topic, most of all. First of all, faith and the people of faith and the Word of God that is so specific that in the image of God, He created them male and female. So if we start there, that life really does scientifically proven begin at conception, and there's either a male or a female at that moment in the womb that has the image of God. It is bearing the image of God, that people really don't understand that. So in my world, it is about education, and especially within the body of Christ, especially with people of faith, to give them a deeper understanding of that. And then the other issue that is 100% left out is the damage done by abortion, not just at the physical moment. And I just told Amy Carter in these words, I'm listening to a replay of an event that happened, I guess, last night, just exposing all of this horror about the abortion pill, so that people are going to have to take a look at that to decide that it is absolutely not safe, and it does have damaging repercussions. But all of that is not discussed. The breast cancer relationship to abortion. I aborted my second child. I deal with abortion recovery, and that's never discussed, about abortion regret and how women suffer from depression, promiscuity, alcohol and drug abuse, and suicide tendencies. I had a girl 2 weeks ago that had had an abortion, and she, when we checked on her, it went well, nothing, it was no problem, until she tried to commit suicide last week. You know, it's like, these are real issues that we sweep under the rug to save the reputation of abortion that is not women's health care. It is very destructive, and I don't know how in the world do we get the basic facts out about the truth of the damaging side of abortion, physically, spiritually, and emotionally, that needs to be discussed.
So the important way to do it is not during an election. As soon as you start talking about, like there was an ad in the last election that I saw, which had a baby in the womb talking to his mommy, and and then what's that sound? And, the baby was being aborted, and right? That is such a turnoff to your swing voter. They view that as so politicizing a difficult decision. You need to do it, this is part of what I'm saying, it's winning hearts and minds. You've got a cultural battle, a cultural fight ahead of you. Those things are extremely important to get out. I think that they will get out more, but you don't want to do it in the context of an election campaign. And the other thing that you're going to need to be conscious of is very clearly in the data saying that life begins at conception. Many people have that view, but it is viewed as theology and not science. It is viewed just as saying, I have an acorn, this is an oak tree. And they go like, it has the potential to be an oak tree. It's not an oak tree. And saying that what is in the womb is a full human life, they're saying, no, it's more like an acorn. And that's not science. So there will be disputes about that. There are, just so you all know, if you read the legal amicus briefs in various court cases having to do with when does pain begin, there's a large body of scientific thought that is being used on the other side, saying that no, that's not pain that you're seeing. That is just a nerve response, but it's not actually pain. And going into why they don't think it's the fetal development is at a point where pain can actually yet exist. So on the science side, be conscious of the arguments, understand that you've got a long battle to win the culture, but the way you do that is the way we do that with anything else. You start with the harms to women, and I think there's openness to feeling that people have been misled about whether something was safe or not, whether it's the MAHA agenda, whether it's vaccines, whether it's whatever else. This can become one more issue where there's reasons to do it, but there's serious downsides, and you need to be aware of those downsides.
Okay, I have a question. Are they teaching the younger generation about safe sex?
Who?
Anyone? Are any being taught safe sex?
Well, I think that there are various schools that started teaching it, and I think a lot of it devolved into things that you would find pretty disgusting. Let's teach your fifth grader what fisting is, that kind of thing. And if most of you don't know what it is, you're very blessed. Don't want to know. So there are places that teach it, but one of the challenges with teaching it is that where it isn't coupled with the concept of abstinence or responsibility, there seems to be more promiscuity, right? So it is a complicated thing in terms of the instructing how to use it, but if there were a campaign to empower women by teaching them, that they actually have a choice about when they get pregnant, and the man should be involved in that decision too, and it shouldn't be done lightly because there are all these really serious harms, that might change it.
As we approach the 2026 campaign season, how would you instruct a candidate, say Buddy Carter running for Senate, and he gets asked the question, how do you feel about abortion, or what is your position? What would you instruct him or advise him to respond? How should he respond to that, avoiding all of the no words that you...
I wouldn't start by saying the usual Republican thing, which is I am pro-life, right? I would say, I believe it, if you can, I'd start with this personal story of somebody you know who's had an abortion and be empathetic to that. Then you would describe the position that you support. And you say, I support Georgia law, which is at 6 weeks, but it has exceptions for the health of the mother, for the viability of the fetus, for life, for rape, for incest. I think there's one other. And I think it's up to Georgians to decide. One of the things that you'll see in there is one of the things we were finding in the late polling was that even if you said it was up to the people of the state, the people who were nervous about this thought you were going to try and turn every state into Alabama. So you'll see that in there, Vance specifically says, I don't remember which states he used, but it's something like the people of California are not the people of Alabama, are not the people of some other state, and everyone, the people, and you don't just say the states decide, you say the people of the states decide what they want and what's right for their state. So, and there's a lot more, but it's in the book. So.
First, I want to thank you for being here today. I think you're terrific.
Thank you.
My question is, to change the topic a little bit, how do you get all these women that are out in the streets protesting, keep your hands off my body, and they're, pro-abortion? Why can't we get those people to be anti-men and women's sports? It's an extension of women's rights that they should have their own sports, and why aren't these people out on that side of that issue?
Oh, consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. I find that the positions of the left are bizarre and wildly inconsistent, and they're internally contradictory to their own positions in the past very often. They're perfectly happy to chuck women under the bus right now, having, it was the left that fought for Title IX, and it was the right that pushed back against it. And now we're in this weird place where we're championing women's sports and Democrats are trying to undo it. I think a lot of it has to do with virtue signaling. When we first heard the very first case that we became aware of males playing in a female, racing competitively against a female, that was in Connecticut in 2018. There were 2 boys running against a high school girl team. Boys who were still completely boys. So there was no excuse other than that they identified that way. And yet none of the girls wanted to complain because there was so much pressure from the school and the surrounding parents. And if you said anything, you were told that you were a transphobe and you were a hater and that you were making it sound like this was a big problem, and it wasn't. It was a one-off thing. And we knew that it was going to be spreading because we could just see it. And we decided to make it an issue and see if we could turn it around. So we spent a lot of time mapping out the strategy to take an issue which was viewed one way and turn it around 180 degrees. And as I was telling someone here, it was very nice. President Trump told us, and Senator Thune has told us, and Bernie Moreno has told us that our men and women's sports issue is what won them the election. And so it was very gratifying in 5 years to get that much of a swing. But when this issue first happened, it was the virtue signaling suburban mothers who were the ones who were the greatest supporters of putting those males on the female teams. Because it would make them social pariahs if they'd said anything else. So understanding that social pressure component, and you see a lot of that happening with Democrats now. They're taking insane positions on all sorts of things because Trump is on the other side of it. So we will see.
Hi. My question is about, I have friends who love to go to women's rallies, and they like to bring their daughters, they like to bring their granddaughters, so they can experience the cause, pro-life, et cetera. What is their problem with some sort of restriction? Like, why are they so opposed to 5 months, 6 months? Make your choice by then. What is it about wanting the choice up until the 9th month, rather than something that has proven detrimental to the mother, a child in pain with a late-term abortion? What is their line in the sand that they can't say yes to anything other than...
You're talking about the 23% who are hardcore abortion at any time for any reason?
A couple friends of mine who they love these rallies, they love bringing their granddaughters, they love this cause, and there's nothing I could say, but what could you say, about late-term abortions or any, a reasonable compromise?
First off, they're very often operating, look, I can't speak about your friends specifically, But a lot of these people have the assumption that the alternative is going to be an inevitable march to a ban. So they're the first line of defense protecting women's rights to control their own bodies. A lot of them are older, so this was a real important issue to them, and they are holding on to it because this is where they got their sense of empowerment. It's a weirdly and interesting libertarian perspective that is held by the left on this one, which is it really ought to be up to the woman. I've even had women who have this view tell me that they actually think that even if a child is small, if they wanted to kill their own child, it's their child, the state should not interfere, right? Which is pretty extreme, but they're very self-determined, and they don't want anybody telling them what to do. It's not that they would do it, it's just that they hate the idea that somebody can tell them what they can't do. And that's part of why one of the pieces of advice you'll find in here is avoid language that sounds controlling. I would try to avoid using even words like allowed or permitted or restricted, because women hate that very often. You know, they live with it enough. This is their space. They feel like they own it, and you shouldn't be telling them what to do. But talk to them, ask them. And I'm very curious, ask them what they think the term pro-life means, and whether they think there isn't some sort of political compromise that makes sense. One of the things that's interesting, though, I was talking with somebody who runs a similar group to yours in New York. One of the things that she's observed in some of their other states where the laws are more restrictive is that where you have restrictive laws where the cutoff is much, much earlier, they find that a lot of women are rushing to get abortions out of state because they're worried that something might go wrong later, and they're feeling pressed to make a decision quickly, and they don't have the time to change their minds. I don't know if that's true. That's just one anecdote of one person who's running one of these counseling centers to try and get women to not have abortions and to keep the baby. But I don't know if there's that pressure or not.
What is the Georgia law again? Is it 6 weeks?
Yes.
So it's really not a pro-choice state then. I mean, if 6 weeks is very long, a lot of people don't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks.
Well, as I'm saying, the term pro-choice and the term pro-life don't mean much of anything.
Okay.
They mean a lot of everything, and depending on who you're talking to. So there are some people who would self-describe as pro-choice who think that 6 weeks is a pro-choice position because they think that the alternative is a complete ban. And there's some time. There's a lot of women, at least for the focus groups I did, that had Georgia and South Carolina participants. There was an acknowledgement that it was 6 weeks. They would have preferred 12 weeks, many of them, just because they want the woman to have more time to make a decision. But, you know, that's one of the things that I think the 6-week law came about automatically post-Dobbs, didn't it?
It was already hanging there.
Right. So I think a lot of these 6-week laws were voted on in the 90s and 2000s and whatever, in case Roe ever went away. I don't know if you voted now if you would come to the same law, but I don't know that anybody wants to raise it. So I'll be very curious what happens in different state elections, what ballot initiatives you see in a place like this, and then I hope that the Republicans are smart about how they handle it, because they handled it very badly in Wisconsin. They could not have handled it worse.
So, to me, why don't they just say 15 weeks instead of 6 weeks? I think that makes a lot of people uncomfortable.
I'm not going to start a civil war in the room. There are a lot of people who think that even 6 weeks is too much, and there are a lot of people who think that 6 weeks is the bare minimum, and that is part of a Hearts and Minds campaign. So.
Hi there. It seems, I think I saw a statistic where most of the abortions performed in the United States at this point are non-surgical.
Correct.
Do you envision a time in the future where this issue will become less of a raging issue, let's put it that way, because more women it'll probably be the standard that women do take this pill, and perhaps it will be quote-unquote effective, and so it won't be so much out in the open that, people will be so divided. You still have your own personal
Yeah,
opinion.
so do you all remember that marvelous movie from the 1930s called The Women? Yes. With Rosalind Russell? Okay. You all have an instruction to go home and watch The Women, just because it was this marvelous comedic Broadway show and was made into this, don't watch the remake, watch the old one with a fantastic cast. You will think you saw men in it, and you'll realize that there were no men in it. Very fast dialogue, but in it, one of the things that happens is a woman goes to Reno to get her divorce. All the women go to Reno to get their divorce. What we've had post-Dobbs is a number of states that are enshrining in their constitutions abortions effectively at any time for any reason, because even if it's some period short of that, there's so many exceptions that you can basically get an abortion at any time. So I think what's going to happen is that states will settle their own laws, and people will, if they're in a state that has fewer options, many of them will go to a different state. I think there already is data coming out of Texas that a lot of the people are going to adjoining states or nearby states. So the state will think that it's got a lot fewer abortions, but it's not clear to me if the overall total will change. Hopefully it will. But definitely there will be fights over mifepristone and various other things. But I think you are right that ultimately the public is going to care less and be less engaged in this. There's going to be activists who care a lot, but I don't know that they're going to get the majorities that they had before when they had a Roe versus Wade that they were facing. So, anything else?
One last question, or are we pretty good? Oh, Sharon? Oh, go ahead.
Microphone coming.
Yeah.
I guess I'm concerned about the children that are born from unwanted pregnancies. Are there any statistics of how these children are developed into
Maybe somebody else who's here has that. I do not have that at my fingertip. My assumption is if they're truly unwanted and they are born, a lot of them get adopted or go into foster care. Foster care is terrible. One of the things that is fascinating when you do focus groups among poorer individuals or among individuals who work in these systems, you hear nothing but horror stories about adoption and foster care and how monumentally dysfunctional these things are. So they're great in concept, but getting them actually working would be a good project to undertake. And with that, I think I'm getting
I
the
do
hook.
have a little stats for your question. So for every baby that is born, there's approximately minimum 30 couples who are wanting to adopt. Yes. So there are loving families who are willing to adopt those newborns.
And adoption and foster care are very far apart.
Yes, they are very far apart. Yep. So, but if a baby is kept and then winds up going into foster care, not everybody wants to adopt out their child, so. All right.
All right. Well, that was fabulous.
Good.
Absolutely.
Picture together.
Oh, picture off. Hold on one second.